In the late 50s, life in the suburban neighborhood of Mission Hills, far from the bustle of LA, was predictable and quiet. At 7 p.m., families living on the 10,000 block of Columbus Avenue were settling in for the evening. With dinner over and the dishes washed and put away, people switched on their television sets to pass the time until bed. A few of the programs they had to choose from on that Wednesday evening were Edward R. Murrow on KNXT reporting on the integration of schools in the South. There was the short-lived Western drama Union Pacific on KRCA. KTLA Channel 5 offered Art LeBeau playing the top music hits of the day. And KHJ Channel 9 was airing the old Our Gang comedies that had been repackaged and renamed for television as The Little Rascals. As viewers chuckled at the off-key warbling of Carl Alfalfa Switzer, they were interrupted by the wail of police sirens racing up their street. Residents living on Columbus Avenue would later note that while the freckle-faced little boy sang on their television sets, his adult self was being shot to death in their neighbor's house.
I guess Alfalfa gets it. And how?
It was a single, violent act that closed the book on his short life. But the circumstances left behind many questions that still haunt his memory. Come walk with me to that night over 60 years ago and separate fact from myth surrounding the life and death of child star Carl Alfalfa Switzer. Carl Dean Switzer was born in Paris, Illinois on August 7, 1927. He and his older brother Harold were hometown entertainers. They were known for singing and playing music at community functions. When Carl was 6, the Switzers went to California to visit family. While there, he and Harold made an impromptu audition at Hal Roach Studios in Culver City. Their timing couldn't have been better, because the studio was searching for fresh faces to fill the lineup of its popular, long-running Our Gang comedy series. The story goes that Hal Roach was so impressed by the boys that he signed them to 7-year contracts on the spot. Carl was given the name Alfalfa, and Harold was called Slim or Deadpan. They joined the 1935 mix of Our Gang mainstays that included George Spanky McFarlane, Darla Hood, William Buckwheat Thomas, and Pete the Pup. The first Our Gang film to feature the brothers is Beginner's Luck.
The first number on our amateur weekly program will be Tom and Jerry.
Harold strums a mandolin, while Alfalfa gives a squeaky rendition of She'll Be Comin' Around the Mountain. With his signature cowlick and off-key singing voice, Alfalfa stood out among the other kids and became an instant favorite with moviegoers. Co-star Darla Hood observed that when they appeared at the studio gates each day, Alfalfa got a more enthusiastic welcome from fans than Clark Gable. Alfalfa's sudden popularity had the disagreeable side effect of inflating an already swollen ego.
That's Butch wants to talk to you. Who's Butch? I am.
In the series run, Carl's main rival was played by Tommy Butch Bond. Although their characters were constantly in conflict, behind the scenes the boys were best friends and remained so for the rest of Carl's life. In Tommy's 1994 autobiography, Darn Right It's Butch, he said that the same was not true of many of his other co-stars. Of his rascal buddy Spanky McFarland, Carl merely tolerated him, and he viewed Darla Hood, his on-screen sweetheart, as a spoiled princess. Darla was far more diplomatic in her opinion, saying that working with Carl was always exciting because no one knew what he was going to do. She also admitted to being a little afraid of her leading man. According to Tommy, Carl either loved you or hated you and would never forget a grudge. and if provoked, he would come at you with his fists. Then there was his devilish sense of humor. He delighted in playing practical jokes on the cast and crew. Tommy recalled a time Carl urinated on the floor lights, and later when they were turned on, the stench became so strong that production was halted until the soundstage could be aired out. His prepubescent antics enraged director George Sidney so much that he once threatened that he was going to look him up when he turned 21 and, quote, kick the living out of him. In 1938, Hal Roach sold the Our Gang franchise, including the entire cast and crew, to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Alfalfa continued with the gang for another 2 years before finally outgrowing the role at age 13. His contract with Metro expired in 1942, and Carl was on his own trying to reinvent himself in a thankless industry. Breaking free of Alfalfa's ghost was not easy for the boy who had once been more popular than Gable. In order to distance himself from the character, he began referring to his more than 60 Our Gang appearances as MGM Short Product. After leaving the gang, Carl worked tirelessly to remain in the limelight. He visited every producer in Hollywood trying to win any role available, no matter how small. There would be many lean years ahead, but he fared better than most of his Our Gang alumni.
West of the Pecos, I wanted to go.
In 1946 and 47, he adapted the Alfalfa character for the Gas House Kids, a short-lived comedy series inspired by the Bowery Boys. The series also reunited him with his Our Gang nemesis and best friend, Tommy Butch Bond.
Come on, start tapping.
Okay, but my heart won't be in it.
No, you stop.
Most of his output at this time was in B-movies, produced by so-called Poverty Row Studios. However, he still landed bit parts in major studio releases and worked with some of the biggest names of the day. 6 films in which Carl appeared were nominated for Best Picture Oscars. Among them are It's a Wonderful Life in 1946 and The 10 Commandments in 1956. Director William Wellman cast him in 3 pictures, the last of which was Track of the Cat with Robert Mitchum, where he played a 100-year-old Native American. In the early 1950s, Carl was seen on television in such programs as Science Fiction Theater and The Burns and Allen Show.
Hello, Mr. Burns.
Hello, you from the drugstore?
Yeah, I got the snapshots we developed for you.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to pick them up.
However, his most steady work on TV was with Roy Rogers and Dale Evans.
The Roy Rogers Show, starring Roy Rogers.
Come along, Bob. No tin-horn sheriff's gonna tell me what to do. Go for your gun, Rogers.
Over 6 seasons, Carl made as many appearances. But more importantly, he became close personal friends with Roy and Dale. It was a relationship that put the struggling actor on a fateful trajectory.
I'll get even with you, Rogers. You wait and see.
You know that kid's headed for a quick grave. The next guy he draws on might take him serious.
Through a business associate of Roy Rogers, Carl was set up on a blind date with Diane Collingwood. She was a 23-year-old heiress to the Collingwood Grain Elevator Company in Kansas. The couple hit it off immediately, and in May 1953, they were married in Las Vegas. But the honeymoon had barely ended when problems began to emerge. Diane was a balanced, college-educated young woman hailing from a prominent Midwest family. Carl, on the other hand, was capricious and had shunned formal education his whole life. By some accounts, he was functionally illiterate. Moreover, it was obvious that the big Hollywood career he imagined was never going to happen. Their different backgrounds played on Carl's feelings of failure and inadequacy. His young wife was unable to quell his inner demons that once brought havoc to the R-Gang sets. Now, instead of childish pranks, Carl sank into alcohol-fueled rages that were too much for Diane. The couple separated after little over 3 months of marriage. However, they made several attempts to reconcile, at which time Diane became pregnant. But when she lost the baby through miscarriage, it was the last straw. Diane filed for divorce in October 1954 on grounds of cruelty. She later withdrew the divorce suit, and for the next 3 years, the Switzers tried in vain to piece together their marriage. While all this was going on, Carl was balancing his acting with a second career as a dog breeder and hunting guide in Northern California. Roy Rogers staked him seed money to get his business off the ground. Some of his first clients were Hollywood heavy hitters like William Wellman and actor Henry Fonda. And it was then that a new character entered Carl Switzer's story. The rocky foothills of the Santa Susana Mountains in Simi Valley was once the home of Corriganville Movie Ranch. It was owned by former actor and stuntman Ray Corrigan, known to everyone as Crash. From the 1940s until the 1960s, the 2,000-acre ranch served as a Western tourist attraction and filming location. While shooting a guest appearance on The Roy Rogers Show, Carl Switzer became acquainted with ranch foreman Bud Stilts. Stilts was a larger-than-life character who was perfectly suited to the rugged terrain where he worked. He was a Navy veteran of World War II and had a reputation for being a tough guy who got things done. Stilts was exactly the kind of man that Carl wished he could be. When Carl learned that Stilts bred hunting dogs, he worked out an arrangement where he would rent animals from him to take on his hunting parties. The meeting couldn't have come at a better time for Stilts, whose tenure at Corriganville was about to end. He had been carrying on an affair with Crash's wife Rita, and it would become the focal point in Corrigan's messy divorce that took so many twists and turns it might well have been a roller coaster. Sparks flew on June 2, 1954, when Crash, along with 3 hired thugs, raided his wife's motel room and found her in the company of his ex-foreman. A brawl ensued that resulted in Stilts pressing assault and battery charges against Crash. 3 days later, Stilts caught Corrigan spying on his house. When confronted, Corrigan waved a gun before fleeing in his car. Stilts chased after him through the streets of the San Fernando Valley. It ended with both men placing one another under citizen's arrest. The legal mess that followed kept lawyers and tabloid journalists busy for months. Both sides filed lawsuits and counter-lawsuits. There was a heated custody battle over the Corrigans' 3 children. Later, Stilts and Rita were charged with perjury for lying about their affair during the divorce trial. They pled guilty and were sentenced to 3 years probation. After the dust settled, Stilts moved into the cozy house on Columbus Avenue in Mission Hills that Rita was awarded in the divorce. The state of California later granted Rita custody of her 3 children. With a ready-made family and quiet suburban home, any man would be content to settle into a quiet life. But where Bud Stilts was concerned, things didn't stay quiet for long. In 1955, the editors of TV Guide brought together 7 members of the R-Gang cast for a photo shoot. Among them were Tommy Butch Bond, Darla Hood, and the best known of the group, Alfalfa Switzer. The photos accompanied an article that filled in its readers on what the gang was up to now. The writer was careful to put the best possible spin on the stories of those who had fallen on hard times. By then, their old films were airing on television as The Little Rascals and were hugely popular. Producer Hal Roach had negotiated with MGM to buy back the rights to the sound films his studio made from 1928 to 1938 and was netting big profits. However, not one of his former child stars was paid a cent in residuals. In 1955, money was at the top of Carl's growing list of concerns. At the time, he was back together with his wife Diane, who was expecting a child. Meanwhile, his film and television work had fallen off sharply, and the income he got from hunting expeditions was not enough to support them. For this reason, the couple relocated to Pretty Prairie, Kansas, where Carl went to work on Diane's family farm. As the couple celebrated the birth of their only child, Diane allowed herself to imagine a hopeful future, because after 3 rocky years together, Carl finally seemed to embrace his role as a husband and new father. One day in the summer of 1957, he opened the newspaper and saw a face from his past. George Spanky McFarland, the darling of the Our Gang series, was on a personal appearance tour of the Midwest. Out of a sense of nostalgia, or an attempt to show off, Carl reached out to his old co-star and set up a meeting. Years later, in an interview with film historian Leonard Maltin, Spanky recalled the short reunion.
We hadn't seen each other since we left the gang, so we had lunch and talked about all the things you'd expect. He looked pretty much the same. He was just Carl Switzer, kinda cocky, a little antsy, and still talking big. He told me he was working on a farm, but had to put a radio in the tractor while he was out there plowing. Knowing Carl, I knew that it wasn't going to last. He may have come from Paris, Illinois, but he wasn't a farmer. After that, I never saw him again.
George McFarland was right. It didn't last. Carl had grown weary of farming and began to see his life in Kansas as a form of exile. When an offer came his way to appear in a movie, he jumped at it. Leaving his family, he went back to LA and made a low-budget teenage melodrama called Motorcycle Gang. Diane realized that the future she'd hoped for was never going to happen. After Carl's work on the movie wrapped, she filed for divorce for the second time, and there would be no reconciliation. Now there was nothing standing in the way of Carl Schweitzer's slow descent, turning into free fall.
I'll count 3 and you take your last breath.
On January 26, 1958, Carl was getting into his car on Ventura Boulevard in Studio City when a bullet crashed through the window and grazed his arm. The injury was superficial and he was treated and released from the hospital within a few hours. When asked if he knew anyone who might wish him harm, he said that he didn't. The next day, police arrested a 30-year-old real estate agent as a suspect in the shooting. He denied any involvement, but it so happened that Carl had been dating the man's ex-wife. It was a dramatic beginning to what turned out to be the last 12 months of his life. A month later, Carl began work on Stanley Kramer's The Defiant Ones with Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. He played a member of a search party who are tracking down 2 escaped convicts. Although he only has 1 line of dialogue, his part is memorable for the portable radio he carries that blares loud music throughout the whole movie. It is well known that Carl had a history of alcohol abuse, but there is speculation that by 1958 he was dabbling in stronger drugs, such as cocaine. Some have pointed to the unusual gestures he makes in The Defiant Ones as evidence. Whether or not the rumors are true, there is no doubt that during his last few months on Earth, his behavior became more erratic. Filming of The Defiant Ones wrapped in March, and it would be Carl's final appearance in a movie. Afterward, he returned to LA where he tended bar while focusing on his hunting business. In April, he borrowed $7,000 from a Hermosa Beach woman, claiming that it was to buy and train hunting dogs. Then in late November, Carl was arrested by park rangers in the Sequoia National Forest for cutting down 15 pine trees without a permit. He was planning to sell them as Christmas trees. He pled guilty and was given a suspended 30-day jail sentence, put on 1-year probation, and fined $225. It was money that Carl could ill afford. By then it had been months since he had any real work. Plus he had defaulted on the loan from the Hermosa Beach woman and was being sued for breach of contract. While this was happening, Carl's old friend and sometimes business partner, Bud Stilts, comes back into the picture. While Carl was sorting out his legal mess with the Forestry Service, he managed to step into another sticky situation. This time, it was over a dog. Late in 1958, he agreed to train one of Bud Stilts' new dogs for bear hunting. But before he got into the mountains, the pup ran away. Stilts gave him 2 options: return his property or pay up for it. Already in a deep financial hole, Carl saw no other choice than to try and locate the animal. He posted notices and took out ads in the paper offering a reward for the dog's safe return. For once, luck was on his side when a man called saying he found the dog. The man arranged to bring it to the bar where Carl worked, and there, according to legend, he collected a $35 reward plus $15 in free drinks. Most people in Carl's situation would drink a toast to their good fortune, but Carl Switzer was not most people, and he had a talent for turning a blessing into a curse. Embittered by divorce and trapped by an impending lawsuit and fines that he had no means to pay, the $50 he shelled out for a dog belonging to someone he was doing a favor for began to fester like an open wound. In his mind, he believed that Stilts should have paid the reward and made repeated requests to get his money back. Stilts, however, did not see it that way, and with Carl being a man unaccustomed to taking no for an answer, it set the stage for a fight. In the afternoon of January 21st, 1959, Carl met up with a new friend named Jack Piott. He was a 37-year-old part-time bartender and freelance photographer who had dreams of breaking into the movies. The pair spent most of the day bar hopping and getting drunk. Brimming with resentment, Carl told his new pal all about how he'd been screwed over by his former business partner. As evening arrived, he convinced Jack to go with him to Stilts' house posing as a cop. Carl just happened to have a prop badge handy for the occasion. He reckoned that if he could convince Stilts that he had the law on his side, he would hand over the money without an argument. At a few minutes before 7, Carl and Jack arrived at Stilts' home on Columbus Avenue. In his bleary state of mind, the plan seemed foolproof and worthy of any caper that he had pulled off in the movies as a little rascal. At approximately 7:30, the first police sirens were heard racing up Columbus Avenue. Residents peered through front windows and gathered on the sidewalk to find out what had happened in their ordinarily quiet neighborhood. Inside the Stilts home, Carl Alfalfa Switzer lay mortally wounded after having been shot by Bud Stilts. An ambulance rushed him to the hospital, but the former child star who charmed audiences with his squeaky voice, freckled face, and cowlick was dead on arrival. He was 32 years old. Meanwhile, a sobbing and battered Bud Stilts was arrested for the shooting, and by morning the story was front-page news in papers across the country. It was reported that shortly after Switzer and Piot arrived at Stiltz's home, an argument over the $50 debt erupted into a brawl, and Stiltz was hit over the head with a clock or lamp, injuring his right eye. Reports varied as to who hit him, but it was right after that he got his .38 revolver. Switzer immediately tried to wrestle the gun out of Stiltz's hand, at which point a shot was fired that narrowly missed Tommy Corrigan, Stiltz's 14-year-old stepson. It was alleged that Switzer then pulled a knife on his former partner and screamed, "I'm going to kill you." This forced Stiltz to fire a second shot that struck him in the groin. The bullet nicked an artery, resulting in massive internal bleeding. When Switzer was taken away by ambulance, police found a folded 3-inch pocket knife on the floor where he'd been lying. The evidence conflicted with Stiltz's claim that the blade was out when he fired the gun. When asked about this, Stiltz said that Alfie must have closed the knife as he fell to the floor. Following a police investigation, the LA District Attorney filed a murder complaint against Stiltz, with formal charges pending the outcome of the coroner's inquest. The inquest was held at the Van Nuys Courthouse on Monday, January 26th. Testimony was heard from the investigating officers as well as Jack Piot, but the testimony everyone wanted to hear came from Bud Stiltz. He broke down twice as he recalled the life and death struggle he had with the former child star. "Alfie gave me no choice," he said. "I knew he would kill me for sure. That's when I pulled the trigger." One of the spectators in the courtroom was Alfalfa's father, Fred Switzer. On the same day, the coroner ruled that Moses Samuel Bud Stiltz had acted in self-defense. The DA dropped its murder complaint, and the man who once pled guilty to perjury was set free on the strength of his testimony. At least one savvy journalist picked up on the two conflicting accounts of what happened. Jack Piot testified that Switzer hadn't pulled a knife and that they were both about to leave the house when the fatal shot was fired. It was on the weight of this account that police filed their complaint, but in the end, investigators were eager to close the case, and decades would pass before someone stepped forward to tell their side of what happened on the night Alfalfa Switzer traded his life over a simple matter of principle. Carl Schweitzer's funeral took place the day after his killer was set free. A small gathering of mourners attended the memorial service at Pierce Brothers Chapel. Afterwards, his body was taken to Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where he was laid to rest among some of his industry's most celebrated names. Among them is director Cecil B. DeMille, for whom he once worked, and who died on the same day as he. It has often been repeated that DeMille's death overshadowed Schweitzer's and relegated it to nothing more than a mere mention in the newspapers. But nothing was further from the truth. For over a week, the sensational nature of Alfalfa's demise made bold headlines across the country. Journalists reported it as a cautionary tale about the dark side of fame. However, one newspaper ran a picture of Spanky McFarlane by mistake. Alfalfa's grave can be found in Section 6, at the base of 3 evergreen trees. His headstone is marked with the compass and square symbol of the Freemasons. Schweitzer was introduced to the order through Roy Rogers, who was a 33rd degree Mason. Another image is that of a dog. Some believe it is Pete the Pup of Little Rascals fame, but in actuality it alludes to his work with hunting dogs. But perhaps there is a deeper meaning hidden here, and the dog is a representation of the one that Alfalfa paid the reward for, which sparked the feud that cut his life short. The circumstances of his life and death did nothing to impact the popularity of the Little Rascals. Over time, the childhood image of the freckled face, off-key crooner was all that anyone cared to see. Today, his gravesite is one of the most visited in the cemetery. Fans both young and old come to pay respects to the memory of what was, and to wonder about the life that might have been. Carl Switzer rests beside his father Fred, who died of a sudden heart attack while on a fishing trip. Carl's mother Pamela later said that her husband wasn't the same after their son's death. Eventually, the weight of the loss was too much for Fred, who died 15 months after his son. That would not be the last tragedy to befall the Switzer family. There was a third grave in this plot of Carl's older brother and our gang castmate, Harold. Harold turned away from Hollywood once he left the series, and would eventually manage a laundromat. On April 14, 1967, Harold got into a heated dispute with his business partner and shot him to death. He then drove to a secluded area and turned the gun on himself. He was 42 years old. After the coroner's ruling, no one questioned that Bud Stilts had acted in self-defense when he killed Carl Switzer. But that didn't mean there weren't doubters. Carl's parents both went to their graves convinced that their son's killer had gotten away with murder. There was little interest among historians to look deeper into the case, especially when in their mind the tale would still be that of a washed-up child star who had a date with destiny. Then, on the 42nd anniversary of Schweitzer's death, reporter Colleen Casson published an interview with Tom Corrigan, the son of Crash and Rita Corrigan. By then, he was a 56-year-old restaurateur who had adopted his father's Western persona. He remembered vividly the night that Switzer, whom he knew as Alfie, came to the house with Jack Piot. He also remembered that Bud Stilts greeted them with his .38 in hand. According to Tom, his stepfather was not a man you wanted to cross. He was just mean, he said. At first, Alfie demanded his money, but once he saw the gun, the brawling began. Switzer tried to wrestle it away just as he had seen his hero Roy Rogers do countless times on TV. Then Jack Piot smashed a glass-domed clock over Stilts' head, and the gun went off. The bullet hit the wall, launching a chunk of plaster that struck young Tom in the leg. The room became instantly quiet, Tom recalled. Then, in his first moment of clarity that day, Alfie said, "We shot Tommy. Enough of this." Switzer and Piot then started to leave. Tom, who was facing toward the front door, heard the gun go off behind him. He looked around to see Alfie sliding down the wall with a pale look of shock on his face. Stilts then turned the gun on Jack Piot, backing him into the kitchen. Piot begged for his life, but it was Rita Corrigan who convinced Stilts not to shoot. Later, when Tom heard Stilts tell detectives that Alfie came at him with a knife, he knew he was lying. Despite being afraid of his stepfather, Tom told investigators what he saw and that he was willing to testify in court. But to his surprise, he was not called as a witness at the coroner's inquest. Still haunted by what happened 42 years earlier, Tom Corrigan told his interviewer, "Bud didn't have to shoot him. It was more like murder." After the inquest, Bud Stilts returned to his life with Rita and her kids in their modest home on Columbus Avenue. He managed to stay out of trouble and the press for the next quarter century before death found him. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. Whether Stilts acted in self-defense or out of rage, there is evidence that he too was haunted by that night. According to Tom Corrigan, each December for the rest of his life, Stilts received a card in the mail signed, "Merry Christmas, from Alfie." Our exploration into the life and death of Carl Switzer ends here at the former site of Corriganville Movie Ranch. Other than the crumbling foundations of the western town, very little remains of what was. Seeing it like this, it's hard to imagine the excitement that this place once inspired. Hundreds of film and television westerns were made here, and on the weekends the public was invited to come dream about adventure in a time when righteousness and justice always won in the end. In many ways, the Corriganville of today is a metaphor for what Carl Switzer's life looked like in January 1959. The man he had grown into bore little resemblance of what he used to be. He was not the only little rascal to meet a tragic fate, but his story stands out because of the many versions and theories that go with it, only some of which were touched upon in this video. Corriganville also figures in as one of the most important settings in Switzer's short life. It was here, below the stoic gaze of Gorilla Rock, that he met Bud Stilts, the instrument of his ultimate destruction. However, the seeds of that end were not planted here. Carl sowed them himself at a time when stardom dissolved into disillusion and fame became failure. No one will ever know for sure whether or not Bud Stilts acted with malice when he pulled the trigger. But one thing we do know for certain is that he didn't go out looking to murder Carl Switzer. Carl Switzer came to him. It paints a picture of a man desperate to free himself from the wreckage of a broken life, and who chose another to be the method of his suicide. But the exact motive that sent him to Bud Stilts is also something we will never know. But it does lead to another certainty. If on the night of January 21st, 1959, Carl Alfalfa Switzer had gone home to sleep off his afternoon drunk, he would have awoken the next morning, hungover, but alive to greet the new day with all of its endless possibilities.
I'm through with love. I'll never fall again. Said adieu to our. Don't ever call again, or I must have you or no one. And so I'm through with love. I've locked my heart. I'll keep my feelings there.